Good morning, it's time to get started. And to introduce our speaker, I'll invite Dr. Kip Weedle, who's the Associate Professor of History and Politics here at Bethel College, to introduce this morning's speaker. Kip.
I would like to welcome you all to the 2021 Menno Simons Lecture Series. In a moment, I'll introduce our speaker, but first I want to say a few words about the lecture series. The Menno Simons Lectureship Endowment, which makes this series possible, was established in 1950 by the John P. and Carolina Schrag Kaufman family to promote the study of Anabaptist and Mennonite history, thought, life, and culture. Every year since 1953, it has brought recognized scholars and artists to the Bethel College campus to share their research or public lectures. In 1997, the fund was substantially enriched by a contribution from the William E. and Maida Gehring Yonke family. Now this year, it is our pleasure to present Dr. Jan Krabel of Kansas City. Her series is titled, "This is Our Story, This is Our Song, The Power of Music in Community." And this first lecture in the series is titled, "The Sound of Science." Dr. Krabel is a Grammy-nominated concert organist, pianist, and harpsichordist, as well as a music educator. She serves as organ conservator at the Kaufman Center for the Performing Arts in Kansas City, organist in residence at the International Headquarters of Community of Christ in Independence, Missouri, and organist at Village on Antioch Presbyterian Church in Overland Park. Throughout her career, Dr. Krabel has performed as both a solo and collaborative musician, designed and led international hymn festivals, taught a variety of music workshops, and performed in at least a half a dozen countries on 4 continents. Among the many ensembles she's been a part of are the Grammy-winning Kansas City Chorale and the Grammy-nominated Kansas City Symphony and Symphony Chorus. This evening, Dr. Krabel will deliver a second lecture at 7 p.m. in Krabel Auditorium. And following that lecture, we will open up the Regier Art Gallery for the Voices Together exhibition of visual artwork included in the new Mennonite hymnal. You're all invited to our evening presentation as well. For now, please join me in welcoming Jan Krabel to Bethel College.
Thank you. The molecules in this room have just changed. The molecules inside your body have just changed. Now, as you heard in this introduction, I am not a scientist. I'm a musician, but I'm a curious person, and I love what science tells us about how sound works. And there are great mysteries still to sound, so we don't know everything. So just consider me a reporter. I'm going to share with you some things that fascinate me right now about the intersections of science and sound. And I'll provide at the end a list of resources if you want to investigate anything further. I hope that something that I say to you will be new and fascinating to you, as it was to me the first time I heard it. So here's the classic question, right? If a tree falls in a forest, does it make a sound? Well, different scientific disciplines have answered that in different ways, and that's the basis of this question, because different scientists look at sound differently. So let's talk about what is sound. You just heard a sound. Would you call it music? If a tree falls in a forest, is it musical? It turns out that sound, as you probably know, comes in waves, various kinds of waves. And for sound, we need three things, according to one of the scientific disciplines. We need a source, something to start those waves, something to change the molecules around us. And then we need a medium through which those waves can travel. For us humans, that medium is usually air, but it can be water, it can be all sorts of other things. And then we need a receiver. And therein lies the root of that question. If a tree falls in a forest and there's no one there to hear it, does it make a sound? According to this scientific discipline, the answer is no, because there was no receiver. There was no thing, being, creator, creation, to say, yes, my hearing apparatus heard that, and yes, I know what it means. I've translated it into something meaningful. So scientists have been looking into the mysteries of sound for centuries, beginning with this guy, Pythagoras. You might know about him. I know about him because my mom was a math teacher, so I know the Pythagorean theorem. Mom would consider me a failure as a person and a musician if I did not know the Pythagorean theorem. So Pythagoras noticed that sounds had different pitches, and he started looking into why. And he found that if he experimented with different sizes of sound sources, that the pitch would change, specifically strings. So if he made a string of a certain length and then plucked it, it would start vibrating, he would hear a sound. He discovered that if he divided that string into halves, that the sound would go up by an octave. And if he divided it into other lengths, the sound would change in predictable ways. And he put mathematical theorems to that, and he showed us that music and math are interrelated. He also theorized, but couldn't prove, that everything is vibrating. And so he came up with the beginnings of a philosophy called the music of the spheres, that everything has a sound signature. Everything, including the stars and the planets. So the way we tune instruments is all based on what Pythagoras learned. So here's a harpsichord, a predecessor of the piano. Various lengths of strings produce various pitches. Here's the next along the line, the piano. You probably know that if you look inside this grand piano, you'll see strings of various lengths. My instrument, the pipe organ, is a community of voices, a community of pipes of different lengths that produce different sounds. Every instrument that can produce multiple pitches has some mechanism by which you lengthen or shorten a pipe or a string. On a violin, it's with your fingers. On a clarinet, it's with your fingers. You're closing and opening valves that help the pipe, that is the clarinet, to act like it is longer or shorter. So we have these waves, and as science progressed, we began to describe these waves that are sound. The frequency, or the number of waves for a given length of time or space, is how pitch is determined. So in this chart, the bottom of those waves is the highest pitch. The top of those waves is the lowest pitch. And it's measured in hertz, or cycles per second. How many times does that wave oscillate per second? Amplitude, or loudness, in music we call it dynamics, is affected by the height of the waves. So these waves are all the same volume, different pitches. Amplitude is measured in decibels. So what defines music? We've now defined sound, but what defines music? I want you to listen to this sound, this audio file I'm about to play, and tell me if it's music. Oop. So what do you think? Music? Not music? Part and part? Yeah, it's interesting how we define music. That was a recording by this guy, Bernie Krause. You may have heard of Bernie Krause. He became famous when he started putting little tiny microphones down ant hills to hear what an ant colony sounds like when it's at work. He's gone all over the world and made recordings like this. And what he would say is, this is all music. And this is what another researcher into music says. Throughout most of the world and for most of human history, music making was as natural an activity as breathing and walking, and everyone participated. It's only recently that we have decided to divide people into musicians and not musicians. That drives me crazy. If you can breathe, if you can talk, if you can clap, if you can celebrate in any audible way, you are a musician. When you walk out of here today, I want you to claim that. You are a musician. We all have different talents, yes, but you are a musician. You are created to sing. So let's talk about how we receive sound then, whether we call it music or not. How do we receive sound? Well, it turns out that humans receive sound in different ways than other receivers. We have a certain range of hearing. It goes from about 20 hertz to about 20,000 hertz, the bottom of our hearing to the top of our hearing. And it won't surprise you that other species have different ways of hearing. So, a blue whale is at the very bottom of that range. A blue whale can hear at 7 hertz. 20 hertz is the bottom of our hearing. My instrument plays as about the bottom of our hearing. There are pipes in the world, in pipe organs, that are 64 feet long, and they operate at about the lowest, lower than some people can hear. This blue whale could hear it very, very well. 7 hertz for this guy. To the top, this is, I have to get this name right, so I'm going to look it up. This is the greater wax moth. It's found nearly all over the world, and science has discovered that it has the top known range of hearing. I said that ours was 20,000 hertz. This guy can hear up to 300,000 hertz. 300,000 hertz. That's 4 octaves above what we can hear. Now, there are other animals, of course, that hear higher than we do. Dogs famously can hear higher than humans, but there are some surprising animals on that list too. Cats and cows and chinchillas and horses and raccoons and sheeps and gerbils and bats and a lot of water dwellers. It turns out that water is a better transmission medium of sound than air is. So dolphins, lots of other water dwellers can hear higher than we can hear. Maybe not better. This is not a better or worse scenario. This is a higher and lower scenario. So speaking of small things, here's another book, Bug Music. The subtitle is How Insects Gave Us Rhythm and Noise. And its author, David Rothenberg, posits that we got music from our surroundings. Bernie Krause, that earlier scientist, would agree with that our music originally came from our surroundings. So, our surrounding here in the Midwest sometimes is full of this sound. Can you hear how that has a rhythm? Da-da-da-da-da-dum, da-da-da-da-da-dum. What if I put a drum to that? It also has pitch. Da-da-da-da-dum. What if I put a melody to that? This author says that our music came from our surroundings. I love it in the summer. I know for some of you it's like fingernails on a chalkboard to hear these guys, but I love it in the summer when a lot of them are singing in chorus and you hear that rise and fall. It's kind of like a lullaby to me. I open my windows at night and it puts me to sleep, just that constant hum of the cicadas. I know I see those shaking heads. Other people don't like it at all, but I really, really do. So Bernie Krause says that every living organism and every site on Earth has its own acoustic signature. So if you're interested in this, look up his website. I'll provide a list later on so you can do that. So here's another animal familiar to many of us in this part of the world. So science has told us that these guys have at least 11 different yips and yowls and things to communicate with each other. Scientists have divided those methods of communication among coyotes into 3 categories. So one is an alarm or a threat. So they need to communicate to others in their den that there's some threat about, or if they're communicating with the threat itself, if it's a rival animal or something, then there is a growl that means I'm going to be mean to you, I'm going to be scary to you so that you're not scary to me. But there are also other communications, greetings. So a greeting of a pup to its parent in the den is different than a greeting of a lone coyote that has lost its pack, that's trying to get back in, greeting over a long distance. And then finally, there are contact greetings, and these tend to be this community chorus that I labeled this as. So these are, I'm glad to be alive, I see the moon, I'm relaxed, I'm just letting you all know that I'm out here. And how does that really differ from why we make music? I don't know. Did you know that you can tell the temperature based on this animal's music? So there is something called Dolbear's Law, and it was published by a scientist named Amos Dolbear, published in 1897. He realized that for the snowy tree cricket, you could measure how many chirps per second and extract, via a mathematical formula, how the temperature was doing. So the shortcut is you count the number of chirps in 8 seconds and add 5, and you get the temperature in Celsius. It's not exactly, there's a much more complex mathematical formula, but that gets you close enough. Here's the loudest animal. I can't play this for you because it would be distracting and probably detrimental to all of our hearing. So I told you that sound waves have both a horizontal and a vertical aspect. So horizontally having to do with pitch, vertically having to do with volume. This guy makes the loudest sound of any created animal. This is the snapping shrimp. They're found in oceans all over the world. In fact, they're a nuisance sometimes because they interfere with other sound-producing sources in the ocean. They're so loud. This guy is only 1.5 inches long. But it has 2 claws, like other shrimp and lobsters, but one of its claws is for hunting, the other is for snapping, only snapping. That snapping claw is about half the length of its body. The other claw is much smaller. The snapping claw can be pulled back and then snapped into place, and when it does that, it creates this bubble of sound that is 165 decibels equivalent in air. So if we were listening to it right here, 165 decibels. Now, for comparison, a symphony orchestra or a pipe organ at full volume playing all out, 110 decibels. This guy, 165. If a female among us screams, the loudest she can scream is about 120 decibels. 165, this guy. A jet engine right here, 140 decibels, 165. So this guy stuns its prey with sound. Snap, and all of a sudden the prey, if still alive, is completely stunned, giving this guy a chance to feed. So back to our music. Bernie Krause would say that we got it from our environment. He says the pentatonic scale itself comes directly from the wild, reflecting not only the rich biophonies of the forest, but also certain animal soloists, such as the common potu and the musician wren. Well, what do they look like? Here's the potu, and here's what it sounds like. And here's the musician wren, and what it sounds like. And here are their songs translated into musical notation. Now, if you're not a musician, this doesn't make sense to you, but it's just a way to translate what we just heard into something that we can see. Now, this pentatonic scale, penta meaning 5 notes per octave. I don't know why that keeps going out. And I don't see my technological partner. If anybody can solve this, let me know. It's back on? It's not on here, so okay, I'll just look up there. Okay, so pentatonic scale, 5 notes. Those bird songs used only 5 notes per octave. They sounded more complex than that, but they used only 5 notes per octave. And it turns out that many indigenous instruments also are based on the pentatonic scale. In our own culture, wind chimes are often based on a pentatonic scale, so that any note can sound and it all sounds good together. Black notes of any keyboard instrument are based on the pentatonic scale. And any song that you can play using only the black notes is a pentatonic melody. One that you probably know is Amazing Grace. It's all pentatonic. So during the pandemic, I started walking a lot. And this was my musician friend. This was my fellow musician along my walks. This is a northern mockingbird. This is my own recording on my iPhone of one bird. Mockingbirds have the largest song repertoire of any bird, up to 200 songs. They're imitative birds. They're very intelligent. In urban environments, they will imitate car alarms and cell phones. Here, a rural environment, this one bird is imitating the calls of many different birds. Up to 200 songs. How many songs are in your repertoire? Just in your mind. How many songs are in your repertoire? It's not 200 for me at all. So back to Pythagoras very quickly. The music of the spheres. It turns out he was absolutely right. So our Earth, our home planet, has a home signature. Every one of us has a home sound signature. According to NASA, where I got this photo, beyond the animal world, sounds can come from a variety of sources. Natural phenomena such as weather, earthquakes, even black holes can produce very low frequency sounds. I was very excited because I got to go here this past summer. It is the Great Sand Dunes National Park and Preserve. It's in south central Colorado. It's a beautiful place, but it also produces sound. According to the National Park Service, singing or booming sounds caused by avalanches moving down the face of sand dunes. They're audible vibrations when sufficient amounts of sand avalanche and compress the air within the dune. The sound's been described as roaring or humming or booming or squeaking, even the song of the dunes. And then there's this, the hum. Not everybody hears this, but there are widespread and very persistent reports of a hum. It's been reported in various locations on our Earth, in the United States, the United Kingdom, in New Zealand, in Canada. This is a photo of Taos in New Mexico. The hum there is a big mystery. Various sources have been theorized, but nobody knows for sure. It might be an industrial plant working away, or it might be something wrong with the receiver's hearing. It might be lots of things, but lots of people hear this sound. And then we have waves that we don't characterize as sound. So light waves are another category of the large spectrum of waves that are around us. So there are light waves, microwaves, radio waves, X-rays, all sorts of different kinds of waves. And sometimes in order to hear them, we have to translate them into something that we can understand as sound. One scientist who did that was Ernst Chladni. He famously made plates, metal plates, and covered them with sand, and then you see a bow there. He would have some source of sound, and the sand would shift, so creating something we can see, waves that we can see, out of waves that we hear. I have to tell you about Voyager 1. So none of you, I don't think, in this room are old enough to remember when Voyager 1 took off, but it was a big deal. Took off in September of 1977. I was alive then. You might have heard of the gold-plated records that were put on this. So this was a record of sounds, both music, but also just sounds, like a child saying hello and greetings in lots of different languages. Those gold-plated records were put on Voyager 1 and 2 in case those spacecraft encountered intelligent life somewhere. But the cool thing about Voyager 1 is it has outlived its original mission by a long shot. Originally, it was supposed to do flybys of Saturn and Jupiter and one of Saturn's moons called Titan. And it did that, but then it just kept going. And yes, some of its scientific Instruments on board quit after a while, but this little spaceship that could is still going. And the exciting thing, in September of 2013, we learned that it had moved outside our immediate neighborhood, outside our solar system. And how did we know that? All of the visual instruments had been shut down, but there were still instruments aboard that could measure waves. And it turns out that interstellar space, as opposed to space within our solar system, have different wavelengths. And what really caught my attention, it's September of 2013, I was listening to the equivalent of a podcast, back then it was just the radio. I was listening to Science Friday, and I heard an interview with the head scientist for this spacecraft. And the question was, how did you know? If you can't see, how did you know that it had gone beyond our solar system? And he said, easy, by the sound. And my ears perked up. And the interviewer said, what do you mean? And the scientist said, it sounded kind of like middle C. Well, that's interesting. So Voyager 1 is a spacecraft with instruments on board that can measure waves. And when we translate those waves into something that we know, then we can hear where we are. Voyager 1 is still going. They fired some thrusters on board in 2017 for the first time in years and years and years, so that it could adjust its trajectory a little bit, and now they're thinking it's going to last until between 2025 and 2036. The little spacecraft that could. So here's something of what our neighborhood sounds like. This is a recording made by Voyager 1 earlier on when it was still in our neighborhood. These recordings are available online. This one lasts for an hour and 10 minutes. I can listen to it forever. I find it fascinating. So it turns out that Pythagoras was right. Everything is vibrating. Everything does have its own acoustical signature. Energy is indestructible. It never dies, it never diminishes, but it does change form. And those changes of form have to do with the wavelengths that it travels at. So something that seems solid to us, like that chair, is actually full of vibrating atoms and molecules. If something vibrates slow enough, it can seem at rest. But also, if something vibrates fast enough, it can seem to us to be at rest. If you took a bicycle tire and you made it spin fast enough, not even a bullet could get between the spokes. It would seem like it was a solid thing, but nothing is solid. We are all vibrating. We are all musicians. Even a black hole can sing. So this is from NASA's Chandra Observatory website. It's called A Universe of Sound, and it talks about a new science called sonification, in which we can explore places we will never get by translating their waves into sound. So I highly encourage you to look at this website. You'll see images like that translated into light. So this isn't actually what is there, it's translated into something we can understand. And this is called the Pillars of Creation. It's actually a nebula called the Eagle, but it's nicknamed the Pillars of Creation. And since this weekend we were supposed to be talking about a new hymnal for the Mennonite Church, I want to just quote one hymn that seems to address this. For the fruit of all creation, thanks be to God. For the gifts of every nation, thanks be to God. For the plowing, sowing, reaping, silent growth while we are sleeping, future needs in earth's safekeeping, thanks be to God. And the final stanza is my favorite. For the harvest of the Spirit, thanks be to God. For the good we all inherit, thanks be to God. For the wonders that astound us, for the truths that still confound us, most of all, that love has found us. Thanks be to God. Thank you.
Okay, we have a few minutes for questions. So tell us what's on your mind.
Can you talk about your thoughts on John Cage and what happened when he walked into the quietest room and claimed to hear his own nervous system working?
Yes, so there is a very interesting phenomena. If you take away all sound, all ability to produce or reflect sound in a chamber, then you start hearing your own bodily functions. And so you hear your own heartbeat, you hear your own breath, you even hear the blood coursing through your veins. And it can be a very scary experience, or it can be an exhilarating experience, and people react to it in different ways. I myself have never been in one of these chambers, but boy, I would like to sometime. So I've read a lot about them, would love to experiment with that sometime. Did that answer your question? Okay, other questions?
Thanks for speaking with us today. So you mentioned in your talk that there are animals that can hear completely different sound ranges than we can. Can you talk a little bit about how they measure that? Because that's crazy.
That was one of my questions as well. How do you know that moth can hear up to 300,000 hertz? What you do is the same thing that they do when they test babies' hearing, human babies' hearing. So a baby can't tell you, oh yeah, I hear that, but you can tell by the reaction. So I'm not sure the particular reaction of that moth at 300,000 hertz, but that's how they can tell. So sometimes it's measuring scientifically heart rate and respiration and perspiration and things like that. Sometimes it's just observing. That's how they can tell.
Thank you.
So I'm really curious, is it just the sheer force of the snap that makes that shrimp produce that much decibels? Or like, how does it get that loud that it's louder than like a jet?
Yeah, it's a good question. I've read about it. Now, remember, I'm not an expert at this, but what I understand is it is the sheer force of the snap. So it is pulling that part of the pincer back and then letting it go with such force that it produces 165 decibels of sound. You can also hear these online. They disrupt sometimes navigational tools of submarines and other ocean-going vessels because you hear these, it just sounds crunchy. In fact, I found online, there was, I think, a set of scientists in Sweden during World War II. I believe it was either Sweden or Norway. And they heard this sound, and they weren't sure what it was, and they thought that it was actually enemy vessels. They were really concerned about this sound. And I listened to a podcast with an interview with one of these scientists, and they talk about how they laughed at each other when they realized it was just shrimp. But yeah, it's an amazing animal, and who would have thought that the smallest animal, 1.5 inches long, could produce a sound that would stun its prey?
So you played an audio clip that was taken from data from Voyager 1. Do you know what kind of waves those were translated from?
Unfortunately, I don't know the answer to that question. The various waves that are part of our neighborhood, our solar system, are many and varied, and I'm not sure exactly what waves produce those sounds. And like I said, that recording is an hour and 10 minutes long, and in it you hear all sorts of things. I mean, there are things that sound very much like dolphins. There are things that sound very much like this singing bowl. And all of those are produced by different waves, and I'm not sure of the specifics of that, but you certainly can find it online. All right, it appears that we're out of questions. I thank you for your attention, and I do want to encourage you, save your applause for a minute, but it is music to my ears. I do want to encourage you to investigate further, and I'll provide a list, so in case that is interesting to you, talk to my colleagues here. Thank you.